Hello there and welcome to this vlog of February 2022, and this will be part 3 of a series of talks on the weird, wonderful and terrifying organisations within the BattleTech galaxy. And today's topic will be the Genecaste. Now, the Genecaste is quite a complex thing in BattleTech, and you may know it by another name, namely the Dark Caste or the Bandit Caste. This is very much like an entity affiliated to the clans. And before I can kind of get into the granular detail of what these are, I kind of need to discuss some like in-world parameters that BattleTech has. Now, BattleTech, as you will know, no doubt, watching such a small niche channel as this, so you probably know more than BattleTech than I do, that BattleTech is very much a real world universe, and in many ways doesn't have a sci-fi element to it. Now, I say that with a caveat. There are obviously science fiction elements to BattleTech, things like PPCs, things like jump ships, and warships. Anything where you're kind of in the space sphere, you'd say, okay, yeah, science fiction-y. But like on the ground, on a planet, it looks and feels very dare I say, 20th century. Especially like in the Succession Wars and around the Inner Sphere. I said this actually on a video I recently recorded that will be going out next week, so you won't have seen that yet, where I was kind of talking about that... in BattleTech, you can kind of imagine going to a pizzeria or like a Chinese restaurant or something like that. So very different from a lot of sci-fi franchises. But there is still a sci-fi element to it, and not just on the engineering side, but on the actual blue sky science side, and also on kind of the sociological side. And I think the Genecaste are the highest level of sci-fi that you are ever going to get in BattleTech, really. And it's important to kind of say that first up here, because I'm going to go into some weird and wonderful directions with this, including probably an alternative history that I think would have been really interesting using the Genecaste, that I think they missed out on. They tinkered with it a little bit from what I understand, but they didn't really go full hog into it, which I think is a bit of a shame. Anyway, what are they and who are they? Well, in order to kind of answer that question, we just need to do a little bit of a recap on the clans. I'm not going to go into vast quantities of detail here because the clans are, 20 topic vlog discussions in their own right. But obviously the clans separated from the Inner Sphere for, 250 years and created their own civilization. And part of the the core component of their civilization was what they termed true birth. So basically they test tube grew human beings, and when you kind of say that, it's quite shocking because you're like, ooh, really? Eugenics? Ooh. And the clans are pretty horrific, and if you've watched this channel before, you'll know that I am really not a fan of the clans, and I think their societies are pretty broken and rotten. But we've got to kind of give it some leeway, and I think when the SLDF ventured out into the great unknown just to try and find habitable worlds, the worlds that they did eventually find were not like Edens. They weren't new Earths out in space. They were worlds that were yes, they could house humanity, but they were very, very, they weren't conducive to mass human life and, and living extravagantly. So the clans by nature are a very austere people. That's kind of born out of their experience as well when they were just traveling, out into the deep periphery, trying to find a new place to live away from the Inner Sphere. That journey in of itself will have been horrendously traumatic, just trapped in ships for years. And a lot of problems occurred while they were in there. There were numerous insurrections and battles, and it was very traumatic. I think in terms of like sci-fi, if you kind of watch like Battlestar Galactica, especially like the new, well, it's not new now, but the reimagined Battlestar Galactica from whenever that was like 15 to 20 years ago now, something like that. And there's kind of their experience of just jumping from place to place, which is basically like the first two seasons, they're just trying to survive. If you've seen that, that's kind of how like the SLDF experience will have been, or similar to that, when they were kind of leaving the inner sphere, because yes, there were a lot of them and they had supplies and everything else, but it will have been absolutely brutal, like as a lifestyle. And I think that had a real like bearing on like the clan mentality, or what became the clan mentality. And then when they got to like, you know, these like proto worlds, habitable worlds, whatever you want to call them, they were then difficult to live on. So by nature, they're going to be a very, very pragmatic people who probably put pragmatism and survival above everything else. You can see that in kind of their aesthetic designs of like even their mechs, because their mechs look like very rudimentary, like they were created with optimization in mind in terms of the design. Like how do we make these things as compact as possible? Like even things like pod space on a mech is like, it's like the ultimate like recycling gig, right? Like you basically, an arm is broken on a mech, so you strip it off and then put another one on, but then that other arm is then fixed and then put onto another mech, so you've just got this kind of constant, and you know that happens with all mechs anyway, but just in terms of the clan mechs, it's like done to the nth degree, and it's done very efficiently, like nefariously in BattleTech. Clans are much more efficient on the engineering side because they can strip out mechs way quicker. I think what would take like an inner sphere mech take a couple of days might take a clan mech take a couple of hours, just because of how heightened and like economical their designs are. So it kind of runs throughout their entire society, that kind of austere, like no waste culture, that kind of thing. And therefore, if you kind of bring that to its nth degree, you are inevitably going to get that discussion within the clans of, well, shouldn't we do this with human beings as well? Like, if everyone is just left to their own devices and able just to, have like family units in the traditional way, well, their big thing as a society was like moving away from like inner sphere politics, inner sphere dogma, inner sphere society, like the old societies that they came from. They were basically re-engineering those societies, and therefore you can see why something like eugenics would have appealed, because you could, and I don't mean this like I believe this, because eugenics is absolutely horrendous, but when you think about it in terms of like you only have X amount of like fresh water, food, fuel, everything else, and you only have like X amount of people who can have that access to those resources, then you have to be, you might have to create a society that's very closed off. Societies on Earth have done that in the past. I mean, very famously, like in China, you were only able to have one child for like many, many years because they were concerned with like overpopulation. The clans kind of operate on a similar level, and that's like, well, we will have like a quota of, for want of a better term, test tube babies, because they will be our like peak performing like aerospace people and mech warriors, and even like obviously elementals as well, like huge, like 7 foot. Well, they're not really even human; they're just like monsters, basically. There is, however, like free birth, which is like a derogatory term in clan society, which I always think is really ironic, given that all their like their founding fathers, so to speak, and mothers as well. There were lots of women involved in that process. Were all free birth, and yet they see it as like a derogatory thing. So slightly strange that, but like people still have like children within like the family unit, and family units still exist in clan culture, especially in certain clans, like in Clan Ghostbar. They're far more kind of accepting of what we consider like traditional family units. Some clans are really not, like they've taken it like to the complete extremity. Just off the top of my head, things like clans like Smoke Jaguar, who are the most brutal clan anyway. They're quite nefarious for like if you become a bondsman of Clan Smoke Jaguar, you basically become like an intern slave. they have no respect for that. Whereas in some clans will be far more like liberal on that. So you can become like a mech warrior. If they capture a mech warrior, you can basically run. It'd probably be older, more obsolete mechs, but you still will be able to kind of practice your profession. It's just you're now doing it for that particular clan. Whereas in like Clan Smoke Jaguar, they'll have no problem like just sending you to the mines, basically. So clans have got like different levels of evil, to put it at its most basic. And it's therefore the same with like with their eugenics programs. Like some are like really into it, and some are like do it because it's favourable to their kind of society based on austerity, that kind of thing. But what you have in, obviously, you've got a situation therefore where you are then like manipulating the genome, and that has side effects, obviously, in terms of everything, in terms of like the biology, in terms of your culture, and it by definition therefore creates the caste system that exists in clan culture, and you therefore have what we're going to talk about today, which is the Genecaste, or again the dark caste, the bandit caste, you might know it as. You might, again, there are many like different iterations of this, and there are quite a few of them. So what is it? Well, if you kind of look at clan culture as being like so hierarchical, you are going to have certain people who want to buy out of that system. Now, we have that in our own real world, and I remember once writing a paper as a student about how I can't remember the topic, it was years ago, middle-aged man now, but like I remember writing something on the lines of one of the problems with modern day society is that there's no buyout function. Everything is so like revolves around capital and money and social status that it's very difficult just for someone who doesn't really want to do that. Someone who just maybe wants to be a musician, but they have to work like a job to kind of, whatever. And I think like our ancestors knew better than to do that with people. And the best example that kind of comes to the top of my head is like the monastic system in Europe in the Middle Ages. And the monastic system was basically used as a bit of a dumping ground for people that wanted to buy out of society. Not always that they want to buy out of it either, but that their family might want to buy them out of society for reasons. Now, there is kind of controversial and non-controversial ones in that. So like a non-controversial one will be, this especially happened in like strict Catholic families, if they had like, say, 4 boys, if you kind of look at how like, especially when like the feudal age here, so like the eldest son would inherit, and they would be kind of responsible for running the family business or whatever else. But the youngest son, they probably ran out of like women to marry them after, because it's like, oh, it's the youngest son, he's not going to inherit anything. Oh, we don't want him living with us anymore. So you kind of had this situation where the youngest son would go into the church. So they might go in as a priest, they might go in as a monk, something like that. So there was a social element of kind of buying out, or people being bought out of society. Then you have the very controversial ones, which is tragically enough happened way up into the 20th century, where you'd have like women who got like pregnant out of wedlock, and they were basically sent to a convent. So you've got stuff where it's kind of done as like an oppressive system. But generally speaking, like monastic orders, if you were in the Middle Ages and you didn't want to kind of till the fields, but you wanted to kind of, you had more of a, you might have had like a religious education, because that's the only education that existed in the Middle Ages. So you might have been taught by a priest or a nun or a monk or whatever, and you found that very interesting, and you had like a real kind of like talent for it. The way to kind of buy out of just being like one of the feudal peasant classes was to join the church, to join the monastic order, where you could literally, and as long as you turned up 2 or 3 times a day to do the Vespers and the Mass and stuff like that, you were kind of left to tend a garden. Obviously there's like a big musical tradition, if you were like, in terms of like choir singing, instrument playing, like lots of different things that you could do, writing even, like very famous up where I live up in like northern England, we had like, if you got to like northeast, the very like top of the northeast of England, you'll find like old monasteries up there where they've got like books that were just like beautifully like hand written and hand drawn by like the monks. So, like you have those people who don't want to kind of engage with society, like on the most extreme level, whether it's in commerce or in warfare or in politics, wherever else it is, or even just like being a serf or whatever. So there is like a get out mechanism where you can say to somebody, look, you don't have to like engage with this. There is a way where you can just live peacefully and do that thing that you really want to do, and no one's going to give you any kind of heat for it. And in our society today, I genuinely think this is a big problem. People are so pressured to kind of conform and kind of feed the system, when a lot of people would be better off, they would want to do this, of just going to, explore their own creativity in the confines of a commune. And you can do things like that, obviously, but generally it's kind of pretty cultish behaviour mechanisms that will, that will take that role. Whereas, and I'm not going to go too far into this, obviously, but I do think there is kind of society needs to think about that now a little bit in terms of, especially in a society where we've got so much, like in the West where like food is completely abundant, we could easily have like you could create like commune systems where, maybe people who don't want to go to university, they don't want to be burdened with that debt, they don't want the regimentation of it, but they go to a place where they've got like-minded people where they can, explore what it is to be a human being. And then maybe after like 5 years, they're much more prepared and feel much more like able to kind of go into something like a formal working structure or an education structure. And it's a complex thing, and I'm not saying that we have to do that exactly, but I just think that having a society with no get out valve, or like, that percentage of society who are not like non-conformist and want to be different, for us just to say to them, no, you can't do that. You have to pay your rent. You have to, pay your council tax. You have to live by our rules. I think it's one of the main reasons for depression. I think it basically makes people so closed in and claustrophobic. And every single, I'm ranting about this now, but and it's not BattleTech, but every single avenue that we have for these people traditionally. So it used to be the university system. You used to be able to do that within the university system. You could go to university for pretty cheap. The generation before me got to go for free in the UK anyway. And you could explore your kind of self as a young human being and everything that you wanted to do within the confines of that, in every sense, whether it's like emotionally, through relationships, through academia, through like study, whatever else. And I think that that's a very important thing for a human being to be able to do, to have, or even for human beings to have that like thing in the back of the mind, well, if it doesn't work out, I can always buy out of society, or whatever else you want to say. Anyway, food for thought there, but let's get back on topic. So that in effect though, what I've just said there kind of sums up the Genecaste. It's those members of the clan society, which is super regimented, who are just like, nah, like I don't want to be involved with that. Now, the clans, unfortunately, being the proto-fascists that they are, tend to hunt these people down and exterminate them for no other reason than they are different, which is kind of what the clans do to anything that's not different. That's different. Just look at how they kind of treated Clan Wolverine, and that was at the very early stage of like clan doctrine, like creation and philosophy. They were still they were still going on like genocidal campaigns against people that they considered the other. So the Inosphere really had no chance when their turn came. But there is that like element in clan society where that get out is to just basically join a civilization on the fringes. They are, like I said, considered the bandit caste, so they're not considered part of clan society. The more conspiratorial mind would say that the clans actually want the bandit caste because they make for like an easy training option for their like mech warriors and warriors to go and destroy whenever they find them. I'm not going to disagree with that. I mean, that seems like a very clan thing to do and a very cruel thing to do. And the clans are very, very unusually cruel and weird. So that would make sense. But the Genecaste, which is specifically, again, they're all kind of roped under one like umbrella of what the bandit caste, dark caste, Genecaste are. But out of the kind of eugenics experiments that you had, you also had like you by teaching like scientists how to do things like this, obviously that information then gets out, And if you've got like, say, like the bandit cast who are on a planet which is like a, I don't know, 99.5% ocean, well, it makes sense. If you're going to populate that planet, it's a lot easier if you basically effectively breed people to breathe underwater. So you can create people with gills. And that's, again, this is like on the frontier and the fringes of how far you can go in BattleTech before you start being in, like, you know, the Star Trek universe. Or, you know, like the Star Wars universe, something like that, where there's like all manner of like mutants or aliens or crazy things going on. This is about as far and abstract as BattleTech gets, and I still think it's still very real world, though. It's still kind of got a completely legitimate law and reasoning for it. It's not just like, oh, well, you know, there's an ocean planet there and they lived there for 100 years and now they're developing gills, because we all know how evolution works and it takes a lot longer than that. This is like the clans have sped this up, and they did it out of necessity because they are in those really closed, ranked, austere civilizations. They don't have many resources, so they have to make the best of what they have. And, you know, genetically engineering people definitely ties into that. For the, like, your regular human beings, though, and whether I include the kind of trueborn in that as well, because they're kind of socially at the top of the clan hierarchy, so that makes them kind of the chieftains of the clans. And the inner sphere, especially, would find all this very horrifying, and like we would. I mean, it's kind of what the like sci-fi monster movies are made of, right? Like, oh, you've got a planet now which is, you know, like zero gravity, and you've engineered people to live in that, and they don't even look human anymore. And the clans do that with their regular like breeding programs. You get that with their aerospace pilots. They'll tend to be like very, very frail, you know, like suited to like, you know, zero G gravities. And you can go on the absolute opposite of that spectrum as well. That you can have like an elemental warrior, like a 7-foot behemoth Adonis, who's just, you know, 3 times stronger than any like regular human being. So you can play around with like genetic manipulation within the confines of like what BattleTech is. And I find the Genecaste to be like really interesting, and I think it's something that it could do with a lot of fleshing out. And what I'm going to talk about is to kind of wrap this up a little bit. I want to talk about what I would have considered to be a very, very interesting alternative history. And we'll, again, I say that I feel like a broken record saying this, but if you've watched any of my videos before, you know that I am pretty strict in the confines I play. I play from 3025 to 3067. Everything after that I've got very little interest in. I kind of know it passively off through osmosis, but I don't read it. I don't care about it. Occasionally, though, I come across something where I'm like, oh, that's quite interesting. And I did see that they developed the kind of Genecaste a little bit up into the 3080s, where they kind of almost like banded together with some like pirate powers, right on like, in the end of nowhere periphery space, where you've got kind of the clans have invaded by this time, they've solidified their power base within the inner sphere, and you've got these quasi civilizations that are just doing their best to survive, and they might be joining up and teaming up, and by the time BattleTech is into the 3080s, I'd imagine that like the bit of the map that we can see with the inner sphere is like the tip of the iceberg. Like by that time, we know the clans are like in the north of that map, but what else is there? I mean, there's plenty more going on in the east and the west and the south, and you get these like new periphery powers springing up, things like that. And I think one of the like an alternative history that I think would have been really interesting to like deploy, which I think they missed a bit of a trick on, because for me it would be very like there would be a real poetical irony to what I'm about to say, and I think it would have been interesting to explore. But let's just kind of push this back to what the clans are in terms of like their emotional involvement within BattleTech, which is kind of the destruction of the promise of a dream. So, the Inner Sphere had this thing that, the Kerensky might come back and save us. The SLDF might come back. Yes, they came back. They didn't save them. They basically, took a wrecking ball to the poor people of the Inner Sphere. And that, I spoke about this on part 2 of this series, about the trauma that would have caused the Inner Sphere, and how I think they made a mistake not continuing that on and really exploring that as kind of a like a drama within that universe. And because sometimes things happen in civilization that are so catastrophic, it just changes everything. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. Like the best real world example recently is obviously World War Two. Like post World War Two, the world within 10 years really got its act together. I'm saying this as Russia and Ukraine are on the verge of a conflict by the looks of it, but there hasn't been like a mainland war in Europe. And what I mean, okay, you had issues in like the Baltic states in like the 90s and the 80s, and but I'm talking like a proper like armies were deployed against each other war, as opposed to like a skirmish or something that lasted a few weeks or whatever. I'm talking about proper like unrestrained total warfare. It hasn't been in Europe since World War Two, and in a sense, like that is because post World War Two, and I know this because I had a grandfather and a grandmother who used to talk about this regular. Like the everything post World War Two changed. People no longer wanted to do things the old way. The old world was destroyed in kind of the bombs and the hell and the horror of World War Two. Best example that I can think of as a Brit is that when Churchill, who was basically one of the greatest heroes in English history in terms of, if you speak to anyone who knows what Churchill did and how he kind of rallied Britain, he's still like a real, Kerensky level character, for want of a better term, in Britain. And he was like, he came back, ran an election, lost the election. This is literally, a couple of years after World War Two. Why? Because for all the populace loved Churchill, he represented the old world and people wanted something different. And out of the ashes of World War Two, and I'm speaking for Britain here, obviously every country's got its own experiences with this, but we kind of built like the welfare state, the National Health Service, because the people then were like modern. We have to be modern. We don't want to look back anymore. We want to look forward. And to an extent, like the clan invasion, I think, will have had that impact on all everyone, the clans included, would have just caused such a chain reaction down society that things would have just become completely changed. And it should have been something that they explored over a 30 to 50 year period. Again, I spoke about this quite a lot in part 2 of this series. For now, though, in terms of the Genecaste, where I think there would have been some beautiful, like, poetic irony, is if you had, like, let's say that, like, the clans thought that, like, the bandit caste were just these, like, wastrels that they used to use target practice on. But in reality, and unbeknownst to the clans, much like the Inner Sphere, unbeknownst to the Inner Sphere, that the SLDF had gone to the far periphery and created a new society for themselves. Someone somewhere within like clan history had taken the technology of the clan, so they had like the all the amazing equipment and knowledge, and that's the one good thing I'll say about the clans is they have amazing science and amazing tech, and they weren't as stupid as the Inner Sphere and destroyed all their industrial and technological base. So plus point there for the clans. But if you had a system, like the people that bought out of clan system almost had their own exodus. So yes, you had like the kind of the sporadic bandit caste who were, or the Genecaste we want to call them, who kind of operated within sight of the clans, and they were just seen as an irritation and that kind of easy buyout option for people in society. But you had at some time a leader amongst that group who basically banded together. They did some exploration, and on the even deeper periphery, or maybe not even, maybe they came back into Inner Sphere space and found their own kind of like corner of the universe where they kind of eked out a living, and that eking out of a living eventually became a far better civilization than the clan civilization. I would have loved to have seen, given the time period that this existed over, so you could say that like someone in the bandit caste did that in like in 2900 or something like that. And they are progressing their technology and their eugenics programs and their mechs, everything else. And in, say, like, I don't know, 3080 or somewhere about that, the clans are at this point. Now, I'm going to give you, this is my alternative history really creeps in here. The problem that the clans had always traditionally is that they didn't have a massive inner sphere technological like grindhouse that is that like industrial power. Instead, they had like a few worlds in the periphery and a few factories churning out these very like high-end mechs, but they didn't have the industrial might to back it up, and that's ultimately why they lost. But by say like 3080, that's not going to be an issue anymore for the clans. Like the clans are going to have like a massive industrial base. Like the four, well, you don't include Smoke Jaguar in this because they were kicked out of the Inner Sphere during Operation Bulldog. But the three powers that remain, so Clan Wolf, Clan Jade Falcon, Clan Ghost Bear, they by that time have got a significant like number of worlds under control, a considerable amount of factories, and have a real sound industrial base to build upon. And I think by the time you get into the 3080s, given how like warlike the clans are, especially like Jade Falcon, who are like nefariously warlike and like to, you know, forget where their neighbours' borders are quite regular. So you might have had a situation there where the Inner Sphere knew that the end was nigh. Like it was only a matter of time before the clans now they have an industrial might to match the Inner Sphere. The Inner Sphere, yes, the Inner Sphere have got a level of technology that's like good, but the clans are still above them. The clans' technology is still better. They still have the whole genetic breeding programs which churn out better mech warriors, that kind of thing. And the Inner Sphere at this point are like, we're done. Like we can, if they decide to invade, we are done. And that is like, if you're in a situation like that, it's game over. Like if both sides know that there's only one winner, that's the end of it. It's kind of if you go back in history and you look at things like you know, things like the nuclear arms race, or whatever you want to call it, where they always used to talk about deterrent. So the fact that the USSR had nuclear weapons meant that the United States knew they wouldn't use them, and vice versa. And it was kind of used as like a political capital of why the world wouldn't end with nuclear warfare, because we were like, well, if one sets it off, that's it, it's game over for everyone, nobody wins. If you've got a situation where there is only one winner, there's only one thing going to happen, and that's unrestricted warfare. Especially, you know, I'm not talking about like modern politics where we've got like systems in place. Like, you know, if like, well, go to the Russia-Ukraine situation. If Russia invade Ukraine tomorrow, the economic sanctions on Russia will be devastating. Like, and it will put a lot of like political pressure on Putin. So Putin may do it because he is Putin, and that's what he's done traditionally. I mean, they invaded Georgia not so long ago. Not in the US, by the way, the Eastern European state of Georgia. That would be funny. Russians in Georgia. But, you know, like, my point is here that, like, there are enough kind of political mechanisms for us to stop that happening. When you think about clan and Inner Sphere civilizations, though, the clans hate the Inner Sphere. Like, they see them as, like, a betrayal of like what the SLDF had to go through and how they kind of destroyed the Star League, that kind of thing, and all the, you know, it's not so much the Inner Sphere, but certainly like the great houses that they want to destroy. That won't have changed. The clans will have still been kind of, yeah, we're going to come and get you eventually. Guarantee that's what they want to do. I mean, they did that. I mean, they just ran the Ilkhan era, right? And they basically just got into Earth. So that was 100 years after the clan invasion. So that's even up to then, you know, they were clearly still thinking about destroying all the Inner Sphere powers and taking over. But what I would have loved to have seen is some, like, again, that poetry of history, is if the clans were about to, like, it was this, like, there was a tinderbox and the clans were like, maybe, I mean, they usually have Clan Wolf as like the peacemakers, the ones who are kind of like passive to this, and you know, they're a warden clan, so they're much more like or they're much less warfare-y than, like, say, Clan Jade Falcon. Then you have Ghost Bear, who are very much more like sitting on the fence with things generally. But that discussion that will have been going on between them, maybe you could have had like pressures from the clans back home as well. They're like, come on, isn't it time that we did what we were going to do here? And if you're not going to do it, then we'll have a go. You know, have like all those smaller clans kind of try muscle in on the action, things like that. But I think what would have been super interesting is at the point that is going to happen, and you build it up, you crescendo it, you write books for it, you kind of get it up to that point where everyone's on the kind of edge of their seat just waiting for this catalyst to happen and for there to be a major warfare on multiple fronts and the Inner Sphere to get taken over. And then you kind of usurp everyone and the clans get invaded by their own like their version of the clan invasion, and that comes in the form of some kind of like Genecaste that's been spent, 140, 150 years right in the middle of nowhere. They've basically built up like a massive like technological advantage, and when they turn up, and I would have loved to have seen them do something like this, because when the clans turned up, there was kind of rumours within the Neosphere that they were aliens. I would actually tease it just to infuriate the fan base that they were aliens. I would have been like, I would have made them look alien. I mean, they are Genecasts, so I would have been that they're in like weird like space suit like things, and like they live in like the spacesuits they're in are like water units or something like that, something completely freaky, and have the fan base like go ballistic over how dare you introduce aliens into BattleTech and yada yada, but make it so that they are aliens, so to speak, but not really. Like they are just like, they are the bad decisions of the clans coming to haunt them, just as the clans were the bad decisions of the inner sphere coming to haunt them. And I would have liked to have seen that, like, that parallel, that irony of history of something like that happen, and the inner sphere then like kicking back and being like, well, there you are. Like, we were so terrified, and now the clans are fighting a war that they are the main, like victim of, so to speak. But this Genecaste don't have any issue with the inner sphere. Like, they're not kind of looking at this like, but they're basically out for revenge for what the clans did to them, how they ostracized them, they hunted their people down, they killed their ancestors, so they went away, they banded together, and then they came back with an absolute sick vengeance against the people that they, and that would have, for me personally, I think a lot of people in BattleTech would have loved to have seen the clans get their comeuppance. I mean, I would have loved to have seen that, because I never felt like the clans got that. Like, Operation Bulldog was quite lukewarm in the grand scheme of things. Like, they annihilated Smoke Jaguar, and it created like a sort of peace between like clan civilization and not actual peace, but it was, they weren't like at each other's throats, but it all seemed a little bit anticlimactic, and then they dropped right into the Fedcom Civil War, and I felt that's where it started to be problematic. I think it would have been far more interesting to kind of have like a prolonged like a Cold War, for to speak, for 50 years between the clans and the inner sphere, and then something really weird to happen that was just completely out of the box. It wasn't anything to do with Comstar or the Word of Blake or the clans or the inner sphere. It was just, well, it was to do with the clans obviously, but it was something that was like really like out of left field, and something believable because of how big the galaxy is, and that 200 years have taken place, and we can see, if the clans did what they did in 200 years, but they were oppressed by their own culture and dogma, which are rotten. And then you had a civilization who weren't oppressed by like caste systems and dogma, but were just completely concentrated on the revenge that they were eventually going to take on the clans because of how they basically drove their civilization to the end of their tether. You could have made it like super interesting as well, like the way the Genecaste are, because these people, were kind of traditionally like, for want of a better term, through eugenics, they were like experimented on to kind of acclimatise themselves to better situations. So if it was, like I said, if it was a water world, you might get gills, things like that. Imagine like if you took that to the nth degree with a civilization where like human beings, they no even longer looked like human beings. Like some of them had like multiple arms and legs. So the mechs would have reflected that. Like mechs would no longer have been like anthropomorphic. Like you could have then gone into the realm of really freaky mechs. Like, because I often think like when I look at like the modern designs, like designs like post the Dark Age or within the Dark Age. And it's like proto-mechs, and it's things that I just think are just far too quirky. It's like they've got the mechs on like 4 legs or 150, just like 150-ton mechs, which just, I hate stuff like that. It's just like, it's like uber crunchy. It's like that, it's like lads discussing how big or whose dad can beat each other. My mech's got to be bigger than you, like that kind of thing. I just, completely meaningless and pointless. Instead, that if you give me a reason for that, if you say that these were created by a realm who had completely forgotten what the inner sphere is, all they knew was hatred of the clans, and they had the technology to back that up, and they appeared on mechs that were just like completely freaky, like maybe then I would then have been happy with a 200-ton arachnoid mech or something completely wacky and wonderful, and watching the clans just in horror as their entire civilization is broken into. And these guys, and obviously, I mean, I'm not going to go into mass detail, and I've not written anything for this or anything. It's just purely off the top of my head, like fan fiction in terms of something interesting you could have done with a bit of poetic license and with a little bit of irony attached to it, and to kind of then explore it as a gaming system and allow the kind of creators of the game to create new mechs with completely new and wacky designs. So you don't have to keep saying, oh, well, now we've got the Marauder Mark 18 or whatever. You can be like, okay, well, we're going to go to designers now and do like really alien stuff that like, and try and get yourself back to that like creative side where like you were in the 80s when you were creating, I mean, I know a lot of these kind of designs were taken from like Japanese mechas, but they still put their own BattleTech like stamp on them and made them like really kind of iconic within that universe. Try to do that again, but just make it like quirky and weird, and then you kind of have an entire new book series out of that. Like you can have like the again, it's me fantasizing about the clans getting their comeuppance, but you can kind of really push that, and you can almost have it as like an apology as well to the Inner Sphere people and the players who like never liked a lot of Inner Sphere people don't like the clans. I kind of include myself in that number, although I love the clans in terms of lore. I think that there's beautiful poetic justice for what happened to the SLDF, but I really don't like them as far as how crunchy they are on tabletop. I don't like the aesthetics of their mechs, that kind of thing, but not for me, but I really appreciate them for being like the big antagonists of the piece. And I just would have loved to have seen them explore that a little bit more, as opposed to everything always seeming to be directed towards the poor Inner Sphere, which they always seem to be like the people that are just getting completely like beaten up all the time. And frankly, I think it gets a bit boring. Like try something a little bit different. Like have the clans like, have this totalitarian state brought right to the kind of fringe and the edge of what they can do in terms of survival, and see how they like react to that. Get your writers, your stable of writers, to kind of develop that idea. Do eventually, if you're doing that, what I've just said there, do eventually these like this Genecaste like crazy people, do they eventually turn on the Inner Sphere, and the Inner Sphere and the clans have to team up again, and that causes the new formation of the Star League? Just spinning that off there. Do you like give me something to really kind of get my teeth into, as opposed to like everything being centered around like Comstar and how the Inner Sphere are just constantly getting piled in on. Anyway, I'm going to end it there. Next week, I'm actually going to do a different topic. What I might do is, with this series, there are 2 or 3 more things I want to explore, but I might do them like across the year. So I might eventually, you might see like a part 4 spring up, or part 5 or something like that. But I think for now I'm going to go back onto like regular like topics, just anything that I usually on a Wednesday or Thursday night, I usually sit with a cup of coffee or a cup of tea on an evening. I read some BattleTech stuff, and I just try to kind of think of new things to discuss. I've got a big list, actually. I've got like a list of about 30 things I want to get through. So I don't want it to be dominated by this particular series. Like I said, I might add to it as I go into the mid part of the year or whatever. Anyway, hope you found that interesting. I think the Genecaste are super, super cool and interesting. And one of those like things in BattleTech that when you explore it, you kind of see the limits of where the kind of franchise goes, but how much room there is to kind of explore, and how good it always is because of how grounded BattleTech is. So it never feels like it's going too crazy. It never feels like too out there. It always feels like there is a reason for this, and it's grounded in like our physics and our reality and things like that. But they don't push it so far where you think, well, that couldn't happen. Unless you're talking about everything post-FedCon Civil War, because that's exactly what the Word of Blake era is. It's basically like, what happened now? Like, that came out of nowhere. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Food for thought, anyway. Hope you all enjoyed that, and I'll hopefully catch you again next time.